Welcome, sports fans. My name is Jake Nazuski. You can call me Jake Iggy or Iggy for short. And this is Iggy's Sports Talk. So, it's been a crazy time over this last month. Sports is finally back, but it's kind of iffy on if things are going to be continuing. As we've seen, there was a massive outbreak in the Miami Marlins franchise. Who knows what's going to happen with the NFL with all these players opting out? It's so incredible, everything that is happening in sports and just in general in 2020. What an unusual year. But I hope everybody has been staying as safe as possible during these weird times, still trying to find ways during this summer to have fun and enjoy your time outside. But I really appreciate you tuning into the podcast this week to be able to hear me and my good friend Matt Provost talk about some baseball. So like I just said, I have a good friend of mine as a guest today, Matt Provost. He is the founder of EverythingMLB, the Instagram account, and he was actually a former bat boy for the AA affiliate for the Blue Jays. So how's it going, Matt?
Well, first off, thank you for having me, Jake. It's good to be here, and I'm quite honored with all the other list of guests you've had that you thought of to have me on. So it's quite the honor. I'm good to be here. It's good to be here.
Absolutely, man. It's great to have you on, and it's really crazy what you've been able to do since 2012 with your Instagram account, EverythingMLB. I mean, looking just at the follower account at the moment, it's at 88.9 thousand. And I'm curious, how did you start this account?
So I started out of pure boredom, which and I could have never ever pictured getting to the follower count it is at right now. I was just bored in my bed one day, and I said, you know what? I have a huge passion for baseball, and so I said, I'm going to start this account. Why not? And I'd post random things. I'd post rosters. I'd post random pictures. 12-year-old me, what am I going to do? And then once I started gaining followers, just because it was one of the first baseball accounts, and I posted all the time, it just started gaining followers, and I started getting more serious about it. So that's how that kind of one thing led to another, and now here I am today.
That's awesome. That's really cool how you started something just out of pure boredom and then it turned into something way greater than you actually even imagined it to be.
Oh, for sure. Like I could have never ever pictured this. And especially, now with I've had some MLB players follow and like the posts and repost their, whatever it is. So that's really good to see.
That's pretty cool. So like what kind of MLB players either follow you or have like really kind of engaged with your account?
So in the past, I've had a lot more likes and DMs and comments. I haven't really had time to go through the followers necessarily, but some of the likes from like Jose Reyes, Yasiel Puig, Eric Thames, Torrey Hunter, Alcides Escobar, just, a list of guys that, that have been in the league for a while and trying to get their attention by, back in the day, I used to post edits of them or whatever, and, they'd like it. But one of the things that really stood out to me was how guys, when I was working as a bat boy, knew about my page. That was the coolest thing for me. And especially one time when our friend Max, who was a co-bat boy with me at the Fish Cats, one time he saw a player scrolling through my Instagram. And Max said, hey, do you know that the other bat boy runs that account? And he said, oh, I had no idea. And we got together and he started talking about my account. So that was one really cool thing that happened a couple of years ago that really made me want to keep posting and stay motivated with the account.
That's pretty funny how that happened. And yeah, we have a mutual good friend, Max, who actually worked with Matt as a bat boy for the Fisher Cats. And he actually told me that story, and I couldn't believe it that it actually, something that like that actually happened, where a player that you're actually, working with has noticed your account. And I was curious, like, how cool was that? Was that when you actually noticed that this account was starting to turn into something much bigger than you really even thought?
Oh, yeah, that's when I knew it wasn't just pure boredom and, posting whatever I wanted. I knew that's when it turned into something that players actually use for news. And that's when I knew, even at 15 years old, at that age, that I should start taking it a little more seriously as players were getting their information from my Instagram page, which was quite flattering. And the player actually was Ryan McMahon of the Colorado Rockies. So not to name drop, but, I'm glad he uses my page for a source of news. So, hopefully I can keep spreading that and keep it growing, especially as a lot of people are inside and got nothing better to do. Hopefully that can be the source of MLB news for a lot of people on Instagram.
Exactly. That's pretty cool. I mean, and Ryan McMahon's not like a small name either. He's one of the biggest prospects coming up for the Rockies. And
for sure.
It must have been really cool But I mean, especially during like this quarantine when everything has just been, very silent in the sports world. It was a very tough, like, sort of trying to think of different intriguing content that would make your followers want to engage.
Oh, that was very difficult. That stretch of time, from March to around now, honestly, I was posting a lot of videos, that would try to attract more followers. So during that time, I kind of strayed away from the news aspect and try to post videos that people would either find funny or interesting, such as, videos of Munenori Kawasaki or different, funny college baseball videos or what have you that would just get views and, just hopefully attract more audiences or more people to the page. So kind of had to switch my approach a little bit, but now I'm back to posting news and going to see where that takes me from here.
Exactly. And there was some really kind of, in my opinion, heartbreaking news that came out just a few days ago, just about the corona outbreak in Miami, or
For
just throughout
sure.
the Miami Marlins roster, excuse me. And it came out that at least 14 players have been tested positive. And it actually came out this morning that the number's up to 17. And it's crazy just how, in my opinion, the MLB didn't think about that this was going to happen. I bet they knew that this was going to happen, but at the same
Yeah,
time, it seems like everybody's just rushing to figure out what's the next move, and it kind of seemed like a whole surprise that something like this happened. And in my opinion, I think that the MLB should have planned way more ahead for something exactly like this to happen.
for sure. I completely agree with you. And the biggest issue for me with this outbreak with the Marlins is that a lot of it was left up to the players, which, they can say the MLB can say they have as good of protocols as they want, but it won't matter if the protocols are left up to the players and if they're very arbitrary. So you can say whatever the front office and the commissioner's office can say whatever they want, but if the players don't necessarily have to follow it, then what good are the rules, right? But I think the good thing is, if we're going to take any optimism out of this, is that it appears to be just a Marlins issue at this point. Because in the past few weeks there have been zero positive COVID tests for other teams, but we're getting close to 20 for the Marlins now. So I just heard, from numerous sources, like they kind of do in the MLS, you know, whatever it is with the Marlins, they can just kind of tell them, oh, okay, you're not going to play. You're not going to play for this time because almost as a punishment, right? Because
Right.
of negligence. So that's what we're looking at here, and we'll have to see what happens because a lot of these rules are going to be new because they've never had to be used before.
Exactly. And as we saw, there's been massive postponage for the Yankees, the Phillies, just in the sense of the Marlins were just in Philadelphia a few days ago. And
Yeah.
it's crazy to even think that now that whole clubhouse is just infected. And
Oh yeah.
and it came out in a report, and Jeff Passan said this perfectly. He's like, it came out that no COVID test for the Phillies, but at the same time, it's been 2 days. And
Yeah.
from my knowledge, it takes 2 weeks for the COVID for like the COVID symptoms to actually start showing. And so nobody actually knows if anybody in Philadelphia has COVID or COVID related symptoms or could be susceptible to spreading it in Philadelphia. And that is just
It's
very
scary.
scary for me. And obviously it's just the hardest part about this whole pandemic.
Yeah. So as much as we want to see baseball happen, and as much as the players want to play, there need to be protocols in place that make sure that this doesn't happen anywhere else, right? So I think the only thing the MLB can do right now is contain it. It
Mm-hmm.
happened. All you can do is contain it, and we'll have to see how well do they handle it. And if this happens with another team, I think that seriously puts the season in jeopardy.
I agree with you. I mean, that was one of the points that I wrote down when I was researching for this podcast is about if this happens again, could this end the MLB season? And it's crazy that we're only in the first week. So this could
Yeah,
100% happen again to where who knows if just one player gets, makes COVID spread just somewhere in some city, and then it just goes over to the other team, and then the whole clubhouse and the clubhouse staff is just infected. It could just turn into a huge mess.
oh yeah, and being in a clubhouse, I just know, and working in a clubhouse for years, I know that those places are incubators
Right.
for disease, right? Naturally, being in a closed space, underground, doesn't really bode well for the coronavirus, or it does bode well for the coronavirus and doesn't bode well for the players. So hopefully, well, the good thing is from what they're saying is that, the spread, it doesn't spread as much outdoors. So we're going to hope and hopefully grasp onto that and hope that the Phillies don't have positive tests coming up. But as you said, we never know, and it can take weeks. So we shall see.
Yeah, that's a very scary and, in my opinion, kind of just like an unknown. And
Yeah,
in my opinion, this sort of situation, the unknown is just like not an excuse right now, because with all these players that just like not only, I don't want to say put their life on the lines, but you could also make that point as well. But just putting their family's safety in jeopardy, their own safety. I mean, you saw what happened with Eduardo Rodriguez. The guy's 27 years old, and he's having
yeah,
heart issues from this. It's just mind-boggling to me of the preparation of how long the MLB had to be able to prepare for something like this. I mean, they were fighting with the MLBPA for 3 to 4 months, and the protocols, like something like this, wasn't bulletproof. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being too harsh on them, and this is just something that you can't control just because of this pandemic. But it just is very surprising to me of how surprised that they were that something like this even happened.
yeah. But you're right. You almost need to be a little harsh when it comes to this stuff, right? Because it's something we haven't seen. Pandemics come around. An estimate 1 in every 100 years and we haven't seen anything like this. Nobody's ever seen anything like this in their lifetimes. So, it's almost everything is unprecedented. There's no precedent for any of this.
Right.
So it is important to be a little harsh, as you're saying, right? Because one thing like the Marlins can spread like wildfire, and you never know, it can infect one player like Juan Soto, and he can be out for a certain period of time. And then what do we think of when we, in 2021, 2022, and the years going forward of this season, right? What do we see if a team wins the World Series, but they don't have their star player, right? So we don't know. There's a lot.
Exactly. I mean, as everybody really talked about at the start of this season, it's going to kind of have to have an asterisk over it. And it's unfortunate for the team. If we even get to the World Series, the team that is going to win the World Series this next year, in my opinion, I think a lot of people think the same exact way. You didn't really win it just because it's not a normal season. You know what I mean? It's 60 games.
Unless the Toronto Blue Jays win it, then I will fully give them every single credit because I'm biased.
I know what you mean. I could say the same exact thing about the Red Sox. But I mean, that's one of the biggest things when, Jeff Passan was talking about the whole 60-game season. The biggest note was when you look at a team like the Washington Nationals, they had a losing record after 60 games and then went on to win the World Series. And so you could even see a team like the Marlins. I mean, let's say that the Marlins were in first place, and let's say that they kept on going the way that they were supposed to out of nowhere. The Marlins that everybody thought was the rebuilding Marlins that couldn't do anything wins the World Series.
Yep. And, what if they get these – what if they're required to get replacement players, and these replacement players are better than their old players?
Right.
And then they end up winning the World Series, right? So there's so much, right? There's so much here that you just can't crown a World Series champion and take it, and treat it as if it's the same as the other years. It's just very difficult to do.
I agree with you. I really think that this outbreak could really change a lot of things just in sports in general over the next few years, because who knows what is really going to happen in 2021 as well. A lot of people are thinking that this is just going to go away. But in my opinion, this pandemic could be something that we could be dealing with for, who knows, the next 2 years or so. And it could really sort of ruin, in my opinion, some of the competitiveness in sports. And it's very unfortunate too, because just solely looking at baseball, this is one of the most exciting times just with all these young players. And when you just really think about the whole more complex part of it, the service time, the salaries, the contracts, people are aging out. Let's say a guy who's like 36, just trying to have like his last season right before he retires, and then bam, has a 60-game season and he doesn't feel safe to play. It's just very unfortunate, the circumstances.
Yeah, and you can even say the same for a guy like Mike Trout, who is in the prime of his career, and he's playing a season that really doesn't mean the same.
Right.
He's missing pretty much the prime of the prime seasons. So it is really unfortunate all across the board to see this, and especially with the minor leaguers, they're trying to stay tuned up right now without a season. they're just they got to play it out as usual. So it's a real shame across the board, and nobody really knows what they're doing. We're all kind of running with our heads cut off a little bit, but I guess what it came down to is the people wanted baseball, so I guess we have it.
Exactly. I mean, in my opinion, this couldn't be a better time for baseball to start, just to bring the country back together. And
Oh
one
yeah,
point on Mike Trout as well, something that has really been, in my opinion, just I'm very proud of him that he is actually playing, because in
oh me too.
August, his wife is going to be having a baby, and he's missing all that just for the baseball season. So you really get to give a lot of props to him, because, I mean, obviously he's the face of the MLB. And it would have been
Yeah,
really tough for the MLB to, go on throughout this season without the face. But, they got Christian Yelich, they got Cody Bellinger, they got Bryce Harper, they got all these different people that can be the face. But Mike Trout's the best player on the planet, in my opinion. But just getting on to a
exactly.
little bit of like a lighter note of what have your thoughts been so far of the MLB season? Are you enjoying it so far?
So personally, I am enjoying it just because I haven't seen I mean, obviously we haven't seen anything in a long, long time,
Right.
and it's good. It's good to see a little bit of normalcy instead of waking up and checking how many more COVID cases there are, or getting up and checking, did the Blue Jays win? Did the Red Sox win? Right.
Right.
And that gives us a little more normalcy in our lives that we haven't had since March.
Mm-hmm.
So I do wish, obviously it can't happen due to the circumstance, but it would be very nice to see fans in the stands. It would be nice to see minor league baseball going on. But if this is the next best option, you know what? I'll take it. I'll take it for sure.
Exactly. In my opinion, I think it was either this or just nothing. And it would have been really tough for me to not have any baseball whatsoever, just because I bet, like yourself, you were so excited for when it was going to start in late March. And
Oh
then
yeah, I was gonna
then it
go. I was
extended
gonna go
to
in March.
exactly. And then it extended until late April. But it's something where, I'm kind of getting used to the fan noises. But it's obviously like really weird, like looking at Fenway if somebody hits it into the monster and they got the cardboard cutouts.
Oh yeah, yeah. So when I was supposed to go to the opening series in Toronto for the Blue Jays and Red Sox, and my dad brought up to me, oh, this is because everything happened so quickly with the coronavirus,
Mhm.
everything. So he came into my room one day and said, hey, like, don't be surprised. Not a lot of people end up going because they're the coronavirus. I'm like, oh, I'd still love to go, and well, it looks like I didn't have really much of a choice.
Right.
Uh, so it is what it is, and try again next year, I guess.
Exactly. I've just loved the competitive nature back. You know what I mean?
Oh
I
yeah.
I mean, I got to the point where I was watching the Korean Baseball League just for
Oh
any sort
yeah.
of competitiveness, and I'm just like, I don't know any of these guys, but I just need to see some like actual sports.
Yeah, something live where we don't know the end of it, and something we haven't seen already. I think that's something that's really important because as much as I love watching old, Red Sox games and what have you, I
Right.
think I started to know the results of them, by the end. So
Exactly.
I think this is good to see something that's unpredictable and live.
Especially last night. In my opinion, last night between the Dodgers and the Astros, that brought me back to normalcy of
Oh, that was unreal.
just like the brawl. You could put brawl in quotations because they had to have their social distance brawl, but just like the Joe Kelly sticking out the tongue, like the pouting.
Imagine if
Oh my gosh.
imagine if they didn't have the social distancing protocols in place and they could fight it out. I think that would have been one of the brawls of the year.
Absolutely. I mean, they've been itching for it. They've been itching for it ever
Oh
since
yeah,
2017, in my opinion.
I know. No, so this has been, even cheating scandal or not, the Astros or the Dodgers have been quite frustrated over the past years, regardless of what the Astros have done. The Dodgers haven't been able to get out of their own way, so they're trying to get revenge, and the cheating just pours gasoline right all over it. So Joe Kelly, even though he wasn't even on the 2017 Dodgers, which is really funny, he just decided to throw himself right in the mix of it and get himself
Exactly.
involved, which is great. I love it.
That's Joe Kelly for you. I mean,
Oh
I
yeah.
just always flash back to the Red Sox Yankees brawl. But one thing that I wanted to ask you about was your opinion on players intentionally hitting the Astros. Because I just want to say something real quick. In my opinion, it happened. It was in the past. So why are we still dwelling on it? Why are
Yeah.
we throwing at guys' heads? Why are we just like trying to just like hurt these guys? I get to make a statement. I understand it, They already got their punishment, though. They already got embarrassed
Yeah,
in front of the whole, not major leagues, in front of all sports in the world. Like,
in the
everybody
world.
knows that this team cheated. And in my opinion, just the reputations of guys like Altuve, Correa, Springer, anybody that was a part of that Astros team, their reputation is just tarnished. And in my opinion, like, these are good players, even though that they
Oh
knew the
yeah,
pitch before. And you could say the same thing about, they cheated in 2018, they cheated in 2019. I don't think so, because they didn't get punished for it. Even if they did a little bit, I mean, you could say
every
the
team
same
does
thing
it.
about, right. I mean, but you could say the same thing about Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds cheated
Yeah,
with steroids, but you got to be a good hitter. You need to be able to actually have some power to be able to hit as many home runs as he did. Obviously, he had
yeah.
some
Like in
help.
my opinion, yeah. Like I totally agree. Like in my opinion, I think the Astros would have won the World Series regardless.
Yeah.
And I'm completely with you about the hitting the guys, because there are so many guys who are on that Astros team now who were not a part of that 2017 team, right? And they come there and they're like, well, what's going on here? I think the biggest thing you could do is just, if you really want to get back at them, I think it's beating them. However, I do think Joe Kelly throwing at them added a little comedic aspect, because it is Joe Kelly,
Right.
right? And he's just Joe Kelly. He is what he is. I wish he would have not thrown at their heads, but instead, a little bit lower, but still all in good fun for Joe Kelly. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that they've already served their punishment and they've already done their time. The court of public opinion has already given them all life sentences anyway. So,
And even me as a Red Sox fan, I'm surprised that I'm even saying this, but like, there's a massive difference, obviously, between the Astros and the Red Sox scandal, but both teams cheated in a sense. And
yeah, so
so
the Red Sox wouldn't really have a leg to stand on. You know what I mean?
I mean, it's something that I'm just like so surprised that people are still talking about it. In my opinion, it already happened. They already got punished, and just get over it. Just start playing baseball. And I understand. I think one of the biggest things too is that the Astros really had some half-assed apologies, and not a lot of players really like that. And maybe it's just because I don't have the experience and I'm not putting myself fully in the perspective of a player who could have lost a whole championship because of somebody cheating and getting an upper advantage through cheating, and I did the right thing. Obviously, I can understand that, and maybe just because I'm not in their place, I don't fully get it. But throwing at guys' heads 3 years later, come on,
Yeah.
guys, come on.
And I think that in the age of social media, I think it becomes a lot more amplified too.
Right.
And also you can pull quotes from the Dodgers that I found a little bit not true, when you're talking about Cody Bellinger saying that Altuve stole an MVP from Judge in 2017. I just don't think that's true at all. I think Altuve was going to win the MVP regardless. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think the Astros were going to win the World Series regardless, because, even people back then who didn't know about what was going on behind the scenes in Houston, we all knew how good of a team they were,
Right.
regardless. And I think that speaks for itself, right? And I think that
Exactly.
I think they won pretty handily throughout the season. So they cheated, they got what they deserved, and I think it's time for baseball to move on.
And I completely agree with you. And it's just like really frustrated me over the time right before the MLB season, when people were starting to doubt if the Astros would even have the talent that they have performed over the last like 5 years. And I just looked at that as complete absurd, just because, in my opinion, Altuve was the same hitter that he was in 2017, in 2016, and 2015. I mean, if you just
Yep.
look at the stats, he's always been one of the best average contact hitters. And he might not have had all the power. That probably helped. But, I mean, when you look at a guy like Carlos Correa, he got drafted number one. Spring was drafted in the first round. I mean, you could even say the same thing about any of the other guys on that team. It's just unfortunate. Not unfortunate. I don't want to say that, because, they deserve to get the rep that they have.
Oh, for sure.
But I mean, it's like you said, the MLB just needs to grow up, and just to be able to, or the players just need to just move on and continue with the game. But
oh yeah, you can go all down the list, and you can see how proven that these guys are.
Exactly.
Before 2017, after. I think you're right. Time to move on.
Exactly. And one of the teams that I brought up in that last little rant was the Red Sox. And as you can see behind me, they're one of my favorite teams. And anytime I talk about the Red Sox, I usually try to take my Red Sox fan hat off and take the bias out of it and just look at it from an MLB fan. And that's what I'm going to do with this. So I want to just talk about the Red Sox a little bit and just how they have performed so far during the season. I want to hear your thoughts first.
It's tough because obviously I'm not in the room with them and with the front office and the owners and whatnot, but it's really tough to see a big market team like this who, I was talking the other day to one of my friends and I was saying that in my lifetime, I've never really seen the Yankees win below 81, 82 games.
Right.
And that's because, they never really go into a full rebuild. And I really don't see the necessity with that with the Red Sox either. And if they really want to get into the luxury tax, then, I don't really see other teams of their magnitude trying to do that. We can't lie. They've drafted some well. They've, done well in the international free agent market with Devers, right, and Bogarts, but it's important to keep that together, and it's important to remember that these fans are always invested and will always sell at the park. But regardless of that, I mean, that might be a curse too, because they're like, okay, well, we can do what we want, no matter what, the people will show up, and that's tough to see, especially now.
Exactly. I mean, just even thinking about how the Red Sox have performed over like the last 4 games. I mean, it's something where to start the season, they scored 13 runs. It's just so anticlimactic. Like, are you kidding me? They got me so excited. Like, this is the 2018 team. And then, they go, the pitching just implodes. But, everybody knew that the pitching was going to not be great. But I don't know why. Just because we got Chaim Bloom, and he's the guy who brought in David Price. He's the guy who brought in Chris Archer and, like, all these incredible guys from the Rays. I just thought that since he's so good at finding good pitching depth, that Chaim Bloom was going to be the answer. But obviously, it's only been 5 games. Who knows what this team is actually going to do? Maybe everybody who's a Red Sox fan and who covers the Red Sox is just jumping the gun. And who knows? This team could be one of the best after 20 to 30 games. Who knows? But, I mean, the offense, it's just got so much high potential, and it's just not showing it. And the pitching, I mean, after Evaldi, you just have nobody. You have nobody.
I'd love to see them dip into the, I love Zach Godley. He won 15 games a couple years ago. I think that's a guy who's a good pickup. A guy like Mike Fultonevich, I think, would be a great pickup. Got DFA'd by the Braves. That's something, he struggled this year, but was an all-star in 2019.
Right.
I think this team should be willing to take some risks. And I think a lot of it, as much as analytics can be a positive, I think it can also be a negative depending on how you use it.
Right.
And seeing an old school guy like Ron Renicky saying that, he's just kind of handed the lineup from, the analytics guys and doesn't really have much of a say. That's really tough to see, especially when I think the best baseball teams use a combination of both. Exactly. I think if you're going to rely purely on the analytics, I think you're going to have a tough time winning games, especially when you're running out Josh Osich and Jeffrey Springs and Hall. I don't even know who they're throwing out there last night. Yeah. So I think it's really tough to win that way. The Rays did it right, and I don't think a big market team like the Red Sox really necessarily has to go in the same direction they did.
I completely agree with you. I mean, the pitching is just something where, like I said, we knew it wasn't going to be great, but I just had a little bit better expectations than this.
No,
to where you let up 21 runs in the last 3 games, and 2 of those games were against the worst team in baseball. It was just, quite honestly, just embarrassing as a Red Sox fan. But I mean, like I said, who knows what could happen? I mean, this team could find its way back to 500 and to being a good team if they go on the road. Who knows? Like, they could really find their stretch where they're actually like really good. Maybe these guys are just a little bit rusty.
What do you think that comes down to? What changes do you think they'd have to make? Or do you think it would just be playing a little more games and having a little more experience?
I think it's more of just playing a little bit more games and getting comfortable with the amount of new guys that the Red Sox do have, starting to understand which guy is best in which situation, not just throwing guys out there and seeing how they do. Obviously, since the Red Sox are now such an analytical sort of team, they try and gauge which situation is the best. But I mean, it's just showed the last 4 games, it just has not worked out. And
I agree with you.
We even saw with how much confidence that the Red Sox put into Ryan Weber. I've been hearing that Ryan Weber is going to be the 4th to 5th starter ever since March. And
Yeah.
what did I just see? I mean, he let up like 6 runs. But, I mean, here's the thing. It's their first start. It's their first time around the rotation. Who knows? I
It's important
mean,
to take a
no,
deep breath, right?
100%. I mean, the Marlins were 3-1, but before this outbreak happened. I mean, yeah, as we saw last season, the Seattle Mariners were one of the best teams and the
Oh,
hottest teams
yeah.
to start off the season. So, I mean, and as everybody talked about, kind of when this 60-game season started happen or started being talked about, the Red Sox don't usually get off on hot starts. They usually, I mean,
No.
even when they won in 2013, I think they started the season like 2-6, and everybody
Oh,
was
yeah.
getting all scared. So, I
One
mean,
thing I would like them to see, it would be playing Alex Verdugo a little bit more, because
yeah.
I think that they're afraid to play him against lefties, but he hits over 300 against lefties. So I don't know what analytic is telling Ron Renicky and the Red Sox brass to keep him out of the lineup,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't like it. So that's
I agree
my
with you.
opinion. That's my 2 cents. I think he should be an everyday player.
I agree with you. Verdugo is just a guy where it's gonna be tough on how to platoon him and Pilar, and like because Pilar is like obviously like really hot right now. But as you
Oh,
saw,
Pilar's the man. Pilar's the man.
100%. But what you were able to see with Verdugo, where in his first start he went 3 for 4, that was very impressive. But I mean, that's the one thing that I love about this Red Sox team is that there's so much versatility just in the offense. I mean,
Yeah.
the pitching is just a whole disaster. But the offense, I mean, they got like 2 or 3 guys that can play second base. They got 2 guys that can play first base. You got 4 or 5 outfielders out there who are all very quality. And going into this season, I thought that they were going to surprise a lot of people, and obviously that's just the confidence that I have in this team just because of my fan bias. But I mean, maybe I'm just being too harsh on them, and maybe everybody just needs to take a deep breath and start and just wait to actually evaluate them after 10 to 15, 20 games like we normally do.
Yeah.
But something
Yeah.
that
No,
Mark
I'm with you.
Teixeira said that just has really been in my head and really making me nervous about this Red Sox team is, since this season is unlike no other, that if you lose 2 to 3 games, you can just double that and say, if you lose 3 games, you just lost 6 games. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And it's
No
something
doubt.
where like even if you get on a stretch where you're just really not doing well, that could deteriorate the rest of your performance for the entire season.
Oh, easily. It's everything is worth. I think it's close to like 2.7. Times a game. So as Joe Kelly just got suspended 8 games, you can double that. You can almost triple that, right?
Right.
Everything is a little bit more magnified, which makes the season a little bit more exciting. So we just kind of got to wait for everything to play out, because the other thing is with this is, if everything went great, if Jose Peraza was hitting 400, if Martin Perez was throwing complete games, then we'd be praising Chaim Bloom, right? So it just goes to show you, like, yeah. So if we just if things played out, it's easy for me to criticize sitting outside, watching on TV. But I think you're right. I think there's always the potential for a turnaround, especially because these guys in the past have generally proven they can. So who
I
knows,
agree with
right?
you. Exactly. And just going off the Joe Kelly point, when I saw 8 games, I'm like, wow, that's actually a lot of games with a 60-game season.
Oh yeah, big time, big time. No, he's like, that's what would that be? That would be over 20 games in a normal season.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly. I
so that
agree
that
with you.
is yeah. So everything's different this year, and there's no real precedent on how to handle these things like suspensions. But it's kind of a figure it out as you go type deal. So we'll have to see how it goes.
Exactly. I agree with you, Matt. And something that I want to go on to next is talking about your experience as a bat boy, because, I mean, nobody actually realizes how much, accessibility that bat boys actually get. They get to hear the conversations that the players and the coaches have and really are able to be really close to the game. So I was wondering, what was it like to be a bat boy for a minor league team?
It was probably honestly, the best experience I've had in my life, and something that I'll always remember, especially the 2018 team. Which had Cavan, Biggio, Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Lourdes Gurriel. But the funny thing is, as great as those teams were, I did also find enjoyment in the bad Fisher Cats teams as well, because those guys are guys that I still stay in touch with, and guys that, I'll never forget. No matter if they're in the major leagues or not. Still, those experiences that I had in seeing them and watching them play pro ball, something that I'll never forget.
Yeah, I bet. And I'm curious, like you just named off some really premier names who are now up with the Blue Jays, like Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, Cavan Biggio, Gurriel Jr. as well. So with being around those kind of guys, what was it like being able to make relationships with guys like that?
So I just, when I was in it, it was really hard to, I didn't take it for granted necessarily, but it was almost like so normal to me. Well, the coolest thing that what I say is to try to picture this is, like, you're at school, you're at your home, you're at your house and you go to work and you open the door and then all of a sudden you're in a major league clubhouse, right? It's like a whole different world. And then you see Vlad, he walk by, Cavan, Bo, Lourdes. It's just, um, it's really something else. And I think that a lot of the relationships I had, they just kind of depended on the guy. Like Vladdy, I talked to him sometimes, but I was always with him. But the one thing that kept us, from not talking as frequently was the language barrier. So sometimes I'd speak half Spanish, half English, do what I could. But he was always a great guy to have around. He's a very funny guy. Cavan Biggio was a great guy. Got pretty close with him. I remember sometimes I go down to Hartford. I mean, 2 years ago around this time, I went to Hartford to go see all the guys, and I was in the clubhouse and just hanging out with Biggio and Bichette and Vlad, probably about like 5 hours before the game, watching them in the cage, hanging out with them, talking. Um, it's just stuff like that I'll never forget. And the relationships are huge because you realize more than anything they're normal guys. They're really as much as that's what the job taught me the most is that how normal these guys actually are. Because as much as I look up to them now and see them on TV, still I just always remember seeing them in the clubhouse in New Hampshire and having conversations with them and sitting down and being there late at night with the boys. So that's something I'll never forget.
Exactly. I bet it must have been like really incredible to be able to especially see where these guys are now and be like,
Oh
wow,
yeah,
like I made relationships with those guys. But I mean, you always see
I
like the
threw it,
person,
Bo. Yeah.
right? I mean, you always see the personality that Vlad has, that Bo Bichette has. And I'm curious, do you have any like interesting stories just over? I don't want to only focus on those guys, but like over your experience as a bat boy, do you have any interesting stories about, like meeting different players or just like anything that you saw that might be worth sharing?
Oh, for sure. So, I think the best times with those guys just came with sitting down and hearing them talk baseball. And one of the coolest things was when I was just in the clubhouse and I was, doing laundry, whatever. And it was after a road trip. And Bo had decided that after the road trip, after they got off the bus, he was going to go in and hit more. And pulls up his dad, Dante Bichette, which was a really cool thing. And I was talking with him, talking with his dad, and just hearing their conversations and him talking to me and asking me questions and, being there alone with them. That's something I'll never forget. Also being the same thing with like Nate Pearson, who's going to make a first start tonight on Wednesday. Stuff like that. It's just stuff you never forget. The conversations you have when you're just alone with them in the room. Um, and Vlad, I knew Vlad was going to go up to AAA before anyone because he accidentally spilled the beans to me, which is funny because he had a package and it was a package. He needed it to go ship to Buffalo, and Buffalo is where the AAA team is for the Toronto Blue Jays.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I see what's happening here. I'm like, you're going to Buffalo. I didn't say that to him, but I knew exactly where he was going. And I said, oh, I'll take care of it, whatever. So I took it and shipped it, whatever. But that was funny that before any news outlet or anything picked up on it, I was able to find out when he was going to get called up to AAA, which was really cool.
That's really funny. And I mean, especially having a guy like Dante Bichette, who was such an incredible MLB player, having him walk in, he must have been like, wow, this is incredible.
You do a double take.
Right.
Take. When I see him walking, he's this big, larger than life guy, right? And here he is just talking with his son, and you hear it, which is it's just a very cool experience, and also just getting to see these guys on a human level because I would see them more in their street clothes and hanging out in the clubhouse and eating with them. One time I was splitting a pizza with Cavan Biggio. You know what I mean? We got a box of pizza and we're splitting it, eating the clubhouse before a road trip, like just stuff like that. But I think it all comes together when you see them on the big league level and you stay in touch with them. I've talked to Cavan a little bit, talked to Bo, Vlad, a little bit since they've gone up. One of the cool things was going to Fenway Park and actually talking to the guys who made it up to the Blue Jays. That's when it all comes together. guys like Randall Grichuk and Aledmus Diaz who rehabbed with the Fisher Cats, but I got to be their chauffeur for a little bit, which was a good time, driving back and forth from the hotel, driving to the airport in Boston. So I got to know those guys and have conversations with those guys, and going to Fenway and seeing him, Gurriel, Grichuk, Gurriel, Diaz, Thomas Pannone, Ryan Baracchi, just all those guys, and seeing them. So talking to them before the game next to the dugout, and you feel almost very cool. And all the people ask how you know. I'm like, oh, I worked with them. I was the bat boy.
Right.
So that's when it all comes together, and that's when it's really cool, is when you get to see them on the big stage and see them do well.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's why I just imagine when you were just telling the story, you just going up to the dugout and just being like, "Hey, what's up, guys?" And like they're trying to ignore all like the autograph seekers, and they walk over and they're like, "What's up, Matt? How's it going, Provost?"
Oh yeah, I know. I remember one time Aledmus Diaz tried shaking my hand through the net. He was like, "Oh, what's up?" Because I drove him to Boston a month before, and he's like, "Oh, I never played at Fenway," but I'm like, he goes, "I'll be there in a month." I'm like, "Oh, well, maybe I'll go." And sure enough, he was right there. Got to shake his hand, see him again, and Gurriel. He was there because him and Gurriel were throwing. And I yelled at their name, and they both came over and was talking to them for a little bit. So that was very, very cool. My sister came with me to the game, and she was like, "How'd you do that?" I'm like, "Well, got lucky enough to work with them for a little bit." So
That's pretty awesome, man. I mean, you also got to not only get close to those guys, but also a lot of other incredible prospects and now MLB stars came through
yep.
the AA system. So, guys like Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, who else were you able to not make a relationship with, but have encounters with?
So I remember 2016. There was Andrew Benintendi and Yoel Moncada were playing for the Portland Sea Dogs, and unfortunately, I wasn't working as a bat boy that day. I was working something else in the stadium that day. But I texted the clubhouse manager and I said, "Hey," I said, "if you need anything, any help, I'll do laundry. I'll do whatever. Just to get my foot in the clubhouse that day." I said, I'm there. After the game, I'll come right down. And the coolest thing was he directed me right to the manager of the Sea Dogs, Carlos Fables, who now is a third base coach for the Red Sox, and Carlos had me make photocopies of the lineup cards, hand them out to all the team after the game. They had all their stats on them and everything. So I was handing them to Benintendi, Moncada. And then after, Benintendi came up to me and asked me if I was able to walk him out to the bus, which is very cool because there were about 100 autograph seekers out there waiting for him and Moncada. So I was lucky enough to be able to walk him and Moncada out to the bus for a couple of days and got to be their bodyguard, so to say. So
that's crazy.
That was another thing I'll never forget. Yeah.
That's pretty cool, and especially now to see Benny, in left field. I mean, he's been on the Red Sox for 4 to 5 years now.
Yeah, that's something that I got his right away. Made sure to get his shirt, right when he came up because that was the first connection I really made was with Benny and Moncada. So that's something that'll really stick with me forever. And when I imagined Vladdy and Cavan and Bo coming up, it was almost like that every day. That's how it felt every day. So just cool experiences all around.
That's incredible, man. And just the last question, I was curious. You brought up 2018, and that was the year that the Fisher Cats won the championship for AA. So I was curious, what was that experience like? Winning a championship with a team as a bat boy.
That was one of the coolest things, for sure. So I remember I was at school. I'd already moved into school, but I was still going back and forth from school to the stadium because thankfully I go to school close. So seeing the championship and seeing that in person was unbelievable. And seeing, being there for the celebration and, all the behind the scenes stuff. And we had a bunch of the big wigs with the Blue Jays coming in, to go see the championship. Obviously Bo was 20 years old and so he wasn't drinking. Even though some guys pressured him to, of course, he wasn't gonna bite. They were all joking. Hey, Bo, you gonna drink? No chance. He was never gonna do it. But it was just cool to see all that stuff behind the scenes. And I've never won a championship myself, so I think this is quite the consolation prize. Being on the bench and helping them, grab bats and clean their cleats for a championship in 2018. I'll take it all day.
Exactly. I mean, a championship kind of energy after the game in the celebration. I bet it must have been something like you've never experienced before.
Oh, I know. And being covered in champagne, being in there and all the guys going crazy. That was something I'll never forget. And going back to school covered in champagne was a pretty cool story to tell as well.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, I always remember anytime, there's like a World Series or anything, and there's a guy who's like 19, 20 years old, they always talk about, Well, that guy's probably going to drink some ginger ale if they win this one.
Oh yeah, no, Bo had some water. Bo had some water lined up for him, so he was all set. He had a great time though. So the whole
That's
team,
awesome.
that was a great team. Everyone held each other accountable. There was a mix of veterans, mix of young guys like Bo and Vlad and Cavan, and paired with guys who were a little bit older, like Craig Breslow, who was about 38, 39 on the team. So it was honestly just a perfect mix up in perfect storm that led to the championship in 2018.
That's really cool, Matt. Well, I really appreciate all the stories that you've talked about, not only just with your Bat Boy experience, but also giving your insight on all the MLB topics that we talked about as well.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor to come on. I've seen some of the lineup of guests you've had, and it's been quite impressive. So the fact that you asked me, I'm very flattered, and it was a great time, and I can't wait to listen more in the future.
Absolutely. And everybody, go out and go on to Instagram, follow Everything MLB, and support Matt.
I appreciate that, Jake. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.